Steel Abyss. Prologue. Atlantic Ocean, 1889. The magnificent transatlantic steamship Empress of Oceania was one of the pinnacles of engineering and luxury of its time. A steel giant, 150 meters long, with two tall funnels billowing thick coal smoke, it proudly cut through the waves, unfazed by the elements. Its 6,000 horsepower steam engines ran like clockwork, and its gilded figurehead, a female Neptunia with a trident, seemed to defy the very depths. In the mahogany and bronze-trimmed salons of this marvelous ship, under the light of crystal chandeliers, expensive cigars smoked, glasses of champagne clinked, and leisurely conversations took place. Among them were English lords returning from the colonies, American industrialists, French artists, and Russian aristocrats. They believed in the power of steam and steel, in the fact that man had finally tamed the once invincible ocean. They could not have imagined that from the dark, untouched depths, something was already watching them, for whom their steel leviathan was nothing more than a noisy tin can full of fresh meat. The disappearance began on the third day of the journey, and it was as quiet and mysterious as in the old days of sailing ships. Chapter 1. The Vanished Millionaire. Mr. Jonathan van der Linden, an American steel magnate worth tens of millions, loved to stroll every morning along the promenade deck of the ship he had built, both financially and engineering-wise. He was a creature of habit. At precisely 7 o'clock in the morning he would emerge from his luxurious stateroom, a cane tipped with a golden eagle, and walk 20 circles, inhaling the salty air and casting commanding glances at the expanse of ocean. That morning, as usual, he went out on deck, but he was never destined to return. His firm, measured steps on the spray-damp wood were the only sound in the morning silence. He had completed his 9th lap when a light breeze blew a strange scent from the ocean, heavy, Swedish, and repulsively fishy. Mr. van der Linden frowned and paused for a moment at the railing, peering into the greenish abyss. Something huge and dark flashed in the depths directly beneath him, so quickly that he didn't have time to decide whether he had imagined it. The next moment, from where he stood, came a short, muffled rustle, like the sound of wet linen thrown violently over something. And silence reigned on deck once more, taking on a deathly hush. His absence was noticed at breakfast. His young wife, Amelie, became concerned, and the maid sent to the cabin couldn't find anyone. Anxious thoughts, initially contained, began to spread throughout the ship like an oil slick on water. Captain Arthur McBride, a Scotsman with gray sideburns and piercing blue eyes, was a strict, old-school professional. He ordered a search of the ship from the hold to the bridge. There were no results, no trace, no hint of Mr. van der Linden. It was as if he had simply vanished. Strong wind, wet deck, slippery handrails, the captain said at a meeting in his saloon, where the first mate, the ship's doctor, and a couple of distinguished passengers, including the Russian Prince Orlov, had also been invited. The ocean, gentlemen, does not forgive inattention, even to its richest and most respected guests. "He wasn't inattentive," cried Mrs. Amelie van der Linden, her delicate, sweet face contorted with fear and grief. "He was as careful as a cat, and he was a wonderful swimmer." Captain McBride shook his head, his gaze unreadable. No man, even the best swimmer, could survive long in the icy waters of the Atlantic. We turned around, searched the coordinates. Nothing. "I'm deeply sorry, madam." They tried to hush up the matter. For the other passengers, life continued as usual. The orchestra played in the main salon. White-gloved waiters served oysters and caviar. couples waltzed. But beneath the thin veneer of carefree civilization, fear was already brewing. Just 2 days later, the stoker, an Irishman named Patrick, disappeared. He went below deck for his shift and never returned. This time, they found a clue. A long, slippery, slimy trail was discovered on the steel deck, near the open porthole leading to the engine room. And several drops of a dark, almost black liquid with a sharp, fishy odor. The chief engineer, examining the trail, turned pale. "Captain, this isn't human, and it's not any fish I've ever seen. It's like a giant eel crawled past, but the track was as wide as my foot." Rumors spread faster than a tailwind. Evening strolls along the lower decks ceased. Passengers now preferred to stay in the center of the ship, away from the mysterious sounds coming from overboard. A day later, something happened that could no longer be ignored. During afternoon tea on the open aft deck, where passengers liked to watch the ship's wake, a deafening crash hit the side of the ship. The ship shook as if it had run aground. Crystal glasses hissed and flew off the tables, and women screamed. The men who ran to the railing saw something huge and dark gray flash through the boiling foam astern. And on the spotless white side of the Empress of Oceania, just above the waterline, there was a sizable dent, and in it, lodged, was a piece of shrapnel. Not steel, but bones. A huge triangular tooth, curved like a scimitar. Captain McBride, picking it up, felt the icy chill emanating from this prehistoric relic. He called an emergency meeting. "Gentlemen," his voice was quiet but audible in the deathly silence of the cabin, "something is following us. I've been at sea for 40 years, but I don't know what it is, but it's big enough and strong enough to dent the steel hull of my ship." Prince Orlov, a towering man with a black beard, asked sullenly, "What are you proposing, Captain? We cannot be targets for this monster in a shooting gallery." "The nearest land is a private resort archipelago called the Islands of Bliss. The owner is an eccentric German industrialist. There's a well-equipped bay there, fresh water, and a radio station. We'll be able to find shelter, repair the damage, and send a distress signal." The decision was made. The Empress of Oceania slammed into full gear, her powerful propellers whipping the water into a frenzy of foam. But those who dared to peer into the dark water astern swore they saw a huge, sluggish shadow in the depths, relentlessly following them. Chapter 2. The Island of Deceptive Bliss. The Islands of Bliss emerged from the morning mist like a mirage painted by a mad but brilliant artist. Snow-white beaches framed a turquoise lagoon, where the water was so clear that coral gardens of incredible colors could be seen through it. Lush, almost unnaturally green vegetation cascaded down the hillsides to the water's edge. Neat bungalows with thatched roofs were visible among coconut palms and blooming hibiscus. Everything exuded an idyllic and tranquil atmosphere. At the pier, whose freshly painted pilings testified to careful upkeep, they were met by a small group. At their head stood a man in an immaculate white tunic and pith helmet. His face was framed by a neat gray beard, and his eyes, clear and calm, gazed out at the world with a slight weariness. "Captain McBride, I presume." His English was impeccable, with a slight German accent. "I am Mr. Torsten, the resort manager. "Welcome to our humble paradise." He was courteous, even considerate, but his manners had a mechanical precision, as if he were playing a well-rehearsed role. Behind him stood burly servants in identical white liveries. Their smiles were wide and identical, and their eyes were empty, like those of carp in a pond. They silently took the mooring lines, their movements precise and synchronized. Captain McBride, concealing his initial tension with a formal air, outlined the situation briefly. Damage to the hull, the need for repairs, and, most importantly, the urgent need to contact the mainland. Torsten listened, nodding sympathetically. "Ah, these vast expanses of the ocean! How treacherous they can be!" he exclaimed. "Of course, we will provide you with all our modest shelter and resources. And as for communications..." He spread his hands in theatrical regret. "Our radio station, unfortunately, broke down 2 weeks ago. The steamer with spare parts and provisions is expected to arrive in 3, maybe 4 weeks. Such are the costs of living in paradise. We are cut off from the bustle of the world." The news plunged those who arrived into silent shock. 3 weeks? Trapped on this patch of land, with a monster lurking somewhere nearby. The passengers were assigned to their bungalows. The service was impeccable. Fresh fruit, ice for whiskey, and refreshments were placed on the tables. Servants appeared and disappeared silently, like shadows, always with a frozen smile. Prince Orlov, surveying the grounds, noted the absence of any animals. No birds, no lizards, only the intrusive, deafening chirping of cicadas. Sir Algernon Fairchild, a thin Englishman whose nervousness was only growing, tried to strike up a conversation with one of the servants, a young fellow replenishing the firewood supply on his veranda. "Tell me, my friend, have you been working here long?" The servant turned his serene face to him. "Yes, sir, quite a while." "Don't you miss home? The mainland?" "This is my home, sir," came the emotionless reply. And the young fellow, having finished his work, departed with the same silent step. That evening, Torsten hosted a dinner in the main pavilion in honor of the guests. The tables were laden with food, and a gramophone played, but the atmosphere itself was tense. The laughter was false, and people's gazes kept drifting to the dark rectangle of open doors, beyond which the surf roared. That's when it happened. A group of young men, the son of one of the industrialists and a couple of his friends, fueled by rum and a false sense of security, decided to stroll along the beach in the moonlight. Their laughter echoed along the shore, causing a sense of uneasy irritation among the others. They walked quite a distance, their silhouettes blending into the shadows of the coconut groves. And then, silence. Sharp, deafening, coming in an instant. Then came a sound. Not a scream, but something else. A short, wet thud, like someone slapping wet meat with great force. then a squelching, grinding sound that made the blood run cold. Captain McBride and Prince Orlov were standing at the time, smoking cigars and gazing out to sea. After hearing the repulsive sounds, they and several other sailors, armed with revolvers, rushed in the direction from which it was coming, grabbing kerosene lamps. What they saw made even the seasoned captain feel a wave of nausea. Something lay on the sand, where the small waves caressed the shore. It was one of the young men, Vernon, the industrialist's son. But all that remained was his lower torso and legs, clad in the white trousers by which he was recognized. Everything else was gone. The surrounding sand was strewn with scraps of fabric and dark, almost black splashes. And from the water's edge, a wide, slimy trail stretched inland, as if a huge sack filled with jelly had been dragged across the sand. And then the water a few yards from the shore surged. Slowly, majestically, a dorsal fin rose from the dark water. It was enormous, taller than a man, and looked more like an ancient shield of dark, almost black leathery material, strewn with barnacles and scars. It stood motionless for a second, and then, slowly, with unperturbed calm, turned and disappeared into the depths. A deathly silence reigned on the shore, broken only by the quiet sobs of Mrs. van der Linden and the heavy breathing of the men. Mr. Thorsten, who had appeared out of nowhere, stood a little distance away, the same polite, slightly sad expression frozen on his face. "Captain," Prince Orlov said quietly, not taking his eyes off the dark water. "Now I understand that the dent in your side wasn't caused by a collision with an underwater rock." He turned to Torsten. "Sir, what the hell is this creature?" The manager sighed, like an adult forced to explain the harsh realities of life to a child. "We call him Old Kron. He is the master of these waters. He was here long before us, and he is very jealous of his domain." "Why didn't you warn us?" Captain McBride hissed, his fists clenching. "And would you have stayed?" Torsten asked softly. "Or would you have tried to sail away? And he doesn't like it when his prey gets away. He can follow a ship for weeks. Your steamer, so big, so noisy. It attracted him, like a bell to a tiger in the jungle." He paused, his gaze sweeping over their pale, frightened faces. "Let me be frank with you. The island is not a refuge. It's a storehouse. And you just restocked it." With these words, he turned and walked slowly back toward the pavilion's lights, leaving them on the shore in the company of the night, the corpse, and the all-consuming horror of the realization. They were trapped, not just on an island. They were in the hunting grounds of an ancient, insatiable beast. Chapter 3. Sundering and Fury. The silence that followed Torsten's departure was thicker and heavier than any storm. It was filled with the echo of that chomping sound, the smell of blood, and the bearish truth thrown in their faces. They were not guests, but provisions. Captain McBride was the first to break the stupor. His voice, hoarse with tension, rang out like a gunshot. "Everyone to the main pavilion, immediately. Sailors, arm yourselves. Orlov, Fairchild, help organize the men." The pavilion was in hysterics. Women were sobbing, men were shouting, demanding immediate action. The atmosphere of a refined evening was replaced by a stifling, animalistic fear. "We must return to the ship, now," one of the merchants shouted, his face purple. "And where are we going?" the chief engineer, Mr. Higgins, retorted coldly, his face smeared with engine oil. "With this creature chasing us? The Empress has a hole in her. We need a dock." Captain McBride, perched on a chair, whistled for relative silence. "Gentlemen, ladies, listen to me. Panic is our greatest enemy. We must organize." He quickly issued orders. Sailors and able-bodied passengers were divided into groups to guard the perimeter. Women and children were housed in the most secure bungalows in the center of the complex. Mr. Higgins and the mechanics went to the Empress to retrieve tools, dynamite, and additional weapons from the ship's armory. But there was no unity. 3 distinct factions emerged among the survivors. The first was the camp of Captain McBride and the rationalists. They believed in fortifications, patrols, and attempts to repair the radio. Essentially, their motto could be summarized as civilization and order. The second was Prince Orlov's camp. He paced among the men like a great black bear, and his idea was simple and furious. "We're not rabbits hiding in holes. We must find this Kron's lair and blow him up. We have cannons on the ship, dynamite. We're hunters, not prey." He was supported by the most desperate sailors and a few young aristocrats, intoxicated with a thirst for revenge. And the third, most dangerous, was the camp of the superstitious and fearful. Their unofficial leader was Pastor Abner Goodwin, a man with eyes burning with fanatical fire. He whispered to the sailors and passengers, "This is not a beast. This is God's punishment. Leviathan, sent for our sins, pride, gluttony. We must appease him. Find a sacrifice, pure and willing, to turn away his wrath." His words fell on fertile ground for fear. Sir Algernon Fairchild didn't join any of the groups. He watched. His practical mind, honed in offices and on the stock exchanges, searched for weaknesses, for miscalculations. He watched as Torsten and his servants calmly continued their business, as if nothing had happened. This calm was more ominous than any panic. That evening, Sir Algernon decided on a desperate step. He made his way to the manager's house. Torsten was sitting on the veranda, smoking a pipe, watching the setting sun. "Mr. Torsten, we need the truth, the whole truth," Fairchild began without preamble. Torsten turned to him. There was no fear or malice in his eyes, only a deep, age-old weariness. "What do you want to know, Mr. Fairchild? Is he intelligent?" Torsten chuckled, briefly and silently. "Reason? That's a human concept. It's older than reason. It's instinct, the survival instinct, perfected. It remembers. It remembers pain. It remembers prey. It's from a time when gods were monsters and men were nothing but wriggling food on the shore." "Why didn't you try to kill him?" "We tried." Torsten blew out a plume of smoke. "My predecessor tried. We found him, parts, scattered all over the island. You don't understand. You can't kill him. You can only delay him, enrage him. He's part of this place, like the tides, like the wind. You wouldn't declare war on a hurricane, would you? At that moment, a deafening crash and roar came from outside, from the beach. Screams, shots. They rushed outside. The scene that greeted them was apocalyptic. The monster, Old Kron, had come again. It hadn't simply appeared at the shore. It had emerged. Its enormous barrel-shaped body, covered in lumpy basalt-like skin, towered half over the pier. Those same flexible, bony, fin-like arms crashed through the wooden planks. Its mouth, lined with rows of sickle-shaped teeth, was gaping, emitting a low-pitched roar that shook the earth. A group of sailors, led by Prince Orloff, fired at it with revolvers and 2 rifles brought from the ship. The bullets bounced off its skin like peas off a wall. One of the bullets struck the creature in the eye. A hissing sound was heard, like a red-hot iron being dropped into water. The monster roared in pain and rage. Its tail, powerful as a mast, whipped up and slammed down on the group of sailors. Prince Orloff managed to jump back. The other 2 didn't. Their bodies were smeared across the pier in a bloody pulp. Then, Kron turned. His small, furious eye glared at Captain McBride, who stood on the dais, barking commands. The monster lunged forward with a speed unexpected for its size. It didn't run, it crawled, using its monstrous flippers, dragging a ton of flesh and fury behind it. The captain didn't flinch. He drew his service revolver and fired 6 shots straight into the gaping maw. This didn't stop the creature. The jaws snapped shut. A sickening, crunching sound was heard. When Kron crawled back into the water, carrying his prize with him, the captain's cap, bloodied and mangled, with its gilded cockade, lay on the ruined pier. The commander was gone. Order collapsed. And in the ensuing darkness, accompanied by the monster's triumphant roar and Pastor Goodwin's frantic whispers, chaos reigned among the survivors. Chapter 4. Hunting Leviathan. The captain's death hung in the air like a heavy, fetid shroud. The order he embodied crumbled to dust. Organized groups were replaced by disorganized groups of frightened men, united only by animal fear. Prince Orloff assumed command by default. His eyes blazed not with fear, but with cold, reckless determination. He killed McBride. His voice boomed early in the morning, gathering the most combat-ready men around him. He's shown he's not afraid of our bullets. Well, we'll find something to scare him. We'll show that son of a bitch where the crayfish hibernate. The plan he outlined was as simple as a punch, and just as straightforward. Mr. Higgins and his mechanics had hauled several boxes of dynamite, detonators, and 2 harpoon guns from the Empress. The idea was to lure the monster into a narrow, deep channel between 2 rocky headlands that formed a natural trap. There, they would bombard it with a hail of harpoons tethered with sticks of dynamite and blow it up. Sir Algernon Fairchild listened to this plan, and his inner voice, accustomed to calculating risks, screamed madness. "Prince, this is too dangerous," he tried to object. "We don't know his habits, his speed. It's one thing to shoot from a safe distance, another to lure him into a trap where we ourselves will be trapped." Orlov turned to him, his face twisted into a contemptuous smirk. "Your stock market games, Mr. Fairchild, are a thing of the past. Here, there are only strength and will. Anyone who is not prepared to take a risk has already lost. Sink or swim." Most of the men, intoxicated by a thirst for revenge and their own fear, supported Orlov. The fear of inaction proved stronger than the fear of error. Preparations lasted all day. The harpoons were shortened and wrapped in dynamite. Long fuses were connected to detonators. The most dangerous role, that of bait, was assumed by a young and reckless sailor, Tommy. He was to row a boat to a designated location and attract the monster's attention before casting off for the rocks where the shooters would be waiting. As dusk fell, the detachment moved toward the capes. The air was charged with the electric tension of a thunderstorm. Even the ocean seemed unnaturally calm, holding its breath. Sir Algernon, armed with a revolver he struggled to hold in his sweaty hands, took up position on the left cape with Higgins. Prince Orlov led the group on the right. Tommy, pale but determined, set off in a flimsy boat. He began to row, then stood up and began swinging the oar, shouting something unintelligible. Then Tommy began to beat the water, increasingly driven by a maddened rage and a sense of duty to all who relied on him. The minutes dragged on like hours. Nothing. And suddenly, just when Tommy had lost hope, the water between the headlands darkened. Not from a shadow, but from something massive rising from the depths. Old Crone appeared silently, his dorsal fin cutting the water with a majestic, terrifying calm. He was even larger than he had seemed before. His eye, the one they had shot at, was now a whitish cataract, but this only seemed to make him look even more ferocious. "Come on, come to us, you creature," Higgins whispered, clutching the harpoon gun in his hands. Tommy, seeing the fin, panicked and began desperately paddling toward shore. But it was too late. Crone didn't pursue the boat. As if understanding the plan, he slowly turned and headed not toward the bait, but straight for the right cape where Orlov stood. "He knows! Damn it, he knows!" someone shouted in panic. "Fire!" Orlov commanded. Harpoons with dynamite sticks attached flew at the monster's carcass. Several of them sank into the thick hide. Crone roared as the explosives caused him pain. Dark blood gushed from the wounds, the smell more pungent and foul than anything known to man. But this was not a mortal wound. This was the wound of an enraged bull. He lunged forward. His massive body crashed onto the rock where the people were standing. Rocks rained down into the water. Several people fell screaming into the water, seething with the creature's rage. Their screams were cut off almost instantly. Prince Orlov, without missing a beat, grabbed another harpoon and, shouting, "For the Tsar!" rushed forward, attempting to plunge it into the monster's skull. It was an act of unimaginable courage and utter madness. Old Crone whipped his head around with incredible speed. His jaws snapped shut. That horrific crunching sound rang out. For a moment, Algernon saw the prince's upper body, still clutching the harpoon, disappear into the monster's gullet. His lower body, twitching convulsively, fell onto the rock. The commander was gone. The plan had failed. The monster, bleeding but full of rage, turned and began methodically destroying the shelters on the left cape. "Run! Everybody run!" Higgins shouted, retreating and stumbling. The flight was panicked. People, crushing one another, rushed away from the shore. Sir Algernon ran, his legs numb, hearing the heavy breathing of the leviathan and the rumble of crumbling rocks behind him. He glanced back only once and saw a gigantic shadow, tinted with the crimson glow of the sunset, slowly creep back into the ocean, carrying with it the bodies of the dead and the last vestiges of their hope. They returned to camp, drained of both body and soul. They had lost Prince Orlov, 7 sailors, and Mr. Higgins, who had disappeared during the escape. They hadn't killed the monster. They had only enraged it further. And now, without strong leaders, they were left to their own devices. A herd surrounded by wolves, penned in a corral where the most terrifying predator was not outside the fence, but within. Chapter 5. Sacrifice. The silence that followed the hunt's failure was different. It wasn't empty or ominous. It was thick, heavy as lead, ringing in the ears with the echoes of the monster's rage and its death cries. The survivors' camp, if it could even be called that, sank into apathy, broken only by bouts of animal fear. Captain McBride and his order are gone. Prince Orlov and his courage and fury are gone. Mr. Higgins and his practicality are gone. All that remains are frightened animals, cornered, and in such a herd there is always a shepherd ready to lead them to the slaughter. That shepherd was Pastor Abner Goodwin. His figure, once comical in its fanaticism, now took on a sinister significance. He wandered between the bungalows, his black coat blending into the darkness, his blazing eyes seeking out those whose sanity was at its breaking point. "See?" His whisper was like the hiss of a snake. "You listened to the proud. You tried to raise your hand against the avenging hand of God. And it struck them down. It devoured their pride along with their flesh." His words fell on fertile ground. The sailors, superstitious by nature, looked at him with slavish fear. Some passengers, especially the older ones, nodded, their eyes betraying a desperate desire to find some meaning in this nightmare. Sir Algernon Fairchild, sitting in his bungalow with a revolver on his lap, watched the rebellion brew. He heard muffled arguments, saw groups of people gathering around Goodwin. He understood. Old Crone's next victim might not be someone the monster carried off, but someone brought to him as a gift. The climax came the following morning. A small group, led by Goodwin and several tall sailors, approached the bungalow where Mrs. Vanderlinden and her maid were holed up. Amelie Vanderlinden, a young, beautiful, and incredibly wealthy widow, became the perfect scapegoat for the frenzied crowd. She was an outsider, an American, different from them. She was a symbol of wealth and luxury, the very sins for which, according to Goodwin, they were being punished. "She is the embodiment of sin," Goodwin shouted, addressing the assembled crowd. "Her pride, her wealth have drawn the wrath of God. She is the wife of the first to fall. Her blood must wash away our sins. Her sacrifice will appease Leviathan." The crowd, spurred on by fear and the fanatic's eloquence, began to murmur. A few attempted to object, but they were quickly and rudely silenced. The atmosphere grew tense. Just then, Sir Algernon emerged from the bungalow. He didn't shout. He simply stood on the steps, blocking the path of Goodwin and his henchmen. His face was pale, but his hands didn't tremble. "You are making a terrible mistake, Goodwin," he said quietly, but loud enough for everyone to hear. "You will not appease this creature. You will only desecrate the last thing we have left, our humanity." "Don't go down the path of sin, Fairchild," the pastor raised his hands, "or else wrath will fall on you, too." "Wrath has already fallen upon us," Sir Algernon retorted. but it comes not from God, but from a monster. And it feeds not on victims, but on our fear. Your fear, Goodwin. And you are willing to kill an innocent woman, if only that fear would recede for a moment. He looked at the crowd, meeting the eyes of those who still had some semblance of reason. If we do this, we will become worse than it. He nodded toward the ocean. It kills because that is its nature. We will kill consciously, by choice. And after that, we will have no excuse. For a moment, it seemed his words had an effect. Some people looked down. But Goodwin could see he was losing control. He's possessed. He's protecting a sinner. Grab them both, he screamed. The sailors took a step forward. Sir Algernon raised his revolver. The first one to come within a meter dies. And just think, if you kill me, who's next? You, Johnson? Or you, Mr. Blake? This creature's hunger is insatiable. And Goodwin will keep bringing him more and more sinners until you all expire on the sand. What he'd hoped for happened. Doubt seeped into the crowd like poison. Those who'd been ready to pounce on a single scapegoat realized with horror that there might be many of them. They ceased to be a single pack and once again became a group of individuals, each fearing for themselves. At this critical moment, as the two groups stood facing each other in a tense standoff, a deafening splash was heard near the shore. Everyone jumped and turned around. Old Cron didn't wait for their decision. He simply made his presence known. His dorsal fin, like a dark sail of death, slowly cut through the water along the shore, as if patrolling his domain. That was enough. Goodwin's spell wore off. The crowd began to disperse, murmuring and with fearful glances. The threat of immediate, real, and utterly indifferent death, utterly indifferent to their internal conflicts, proved stronger than the fear of the imaginary wrath of God. Goodwin stood alone, his face twisted into a mask of impotent rage. He hissed something at Sir Algernon and disappeared into the shadows of the trees. The immediate threat had passed, but Sir Algernon knew it was only a reprieve. Society had completely disintegrated. Trust was dead. They were sitting on suitcases of dynamite, and any spark, be it a reappearance of the monster or another disappearance, could lead to an explosion, this time directed inward. He looked at Mrs. van der Linden's pale, frightened face in the doorway, and realized that staying here meant slowly and surely going mad, or being torn to pieces by his neighbors. He needed a new plan, a desperate one, insane, but the only one left to those who still remembered what it was to be human. Chapter 6. Escape from Hell. The decision matured in complete darkness, accompanied by the sound of the surf, in which Sir Algernon fancied he heard the heavy sighs of a sleeping monster. To stay meant death. Either by Cron's teeth or at the hands of his crazed neighbors. There was only one way, back to the Empress. Not to swim, with a hole in the ship and no crew, that would be suicide. But to barricade themselves within the ship's steel belly. It was their only fortress in this ocean of madness. The plan was absurdly simple, and therefore at least possible. He needed to reach the lifeboats, walk along the shore to the steamer, and climb aboard via a rope ladder. He shared it with Mrs. van der Linden and a handful of those who still retained their sanity. Old Dr. Ambrose, young sailor Jack, who had miraculously survived the hunt, and a couple of frightened but unbroken passengers. At night, when everyone's asleep, Sir Algernon whispered, gathering them in his bungalow. His plan was met with tacit agreement. There were no alternatives. But the night on the Isle of Bliss was never truly dark. Moonlight silvered the sand, and a phosphorescent glow emanated from the ocean. And the silence was never complete. It was broken by the cries of cicadas and a distant, low-pitched hum that seemed to emanate from the earth itself. They crept like shadows toward the spot where the two largest boats were moored. Every step on the crunching gravel echoed in their ears like a deafening roar. Sir Algernon walked ahead, clutching a revolver. He hadn't intended to shoot the men, but he was prepared. They were waiting for them. A figure in black emerged from behind the palm trunks. Pastor Goodwin. He stood with his arms outstretched, as if about to bless them. "Where are you going, lost sheep?" His voice was sweet as poison. "Abandoning your flock? Fleeing from the will of the Lord?" Behind him, his henchmen materialized from the darkness. Several sailors with knives and clubs. Their eyes glittered with a feverish glint. "We are going, Goodwin," Sir Algernon said firmly. "Do not disturb us." "Are you going? Or are you running to offer him another sacrifice?" The pastor took a step forward. "Will you lead him away from the island? Or will you bring his fury upon our heads?" "No. You will stay. All of you will stay. For the common good." Jack, the young sailor, clenched his fists. "We're not going to be slaughtered like sheep, preacher." The tension reached its peak. Another second and the massacre would have begun. But chance intervened. Or the island itself. A sound came from the ocean. Not a roar, but something else. A dull, powerful thud, like a giant oar slapping the surface. Everyone involuntarily turned around. There, in a strip of moonlight, a thick blanket of fog hissed across the water. It rolled onto the shore with unnatural speed, cold and thick, carrying with it the scent of rotting seaweed and coppery blood. Something stirred in the fog. "He's here," someone groaned. It wasn't the creature they'd seen before. It was something more ancient and terrifying. Tentacles slithered out of the fog onto the shore, not of flesh, but of water and shadow, woven from fear itself. They wrapped around the legs of the nearest sailor from Goodwin's gang. He cried out, a short, staccato cry, and was pulled into the misty darkness. The scream died away, replaced by the sound of breaking bones and chomping. Something hadn't simply arrived. It was in a different form, born of their own fear and rage. Was it Kronos or a new ocean monster? There was no time for such thoughts. Chaos erupted. People scattered in all directions. Plans, feuds, ideas, all were mingled in a single instinct for survival. "Run to the boat!" cried Sir Algernon, seizing Mrs. van der Linden's arm. They ran, heedless of the road, stumbling over roots and rocks. Cold tendrils of fog licked their heels. Behind them, they could hear the screams of those who hadn't made it. Among them was Pastor Goodwin's frantic cry, a mingling of terror and triumph. "I'm coming to you! Receive me!" Their boat was in place. They pushed it away from the shore and rowed with all their might, heading into the fog hanging over the water. It was so thick that after a few strokes, the shore disappeared from view. They sailed in a milky white haze, in complete silence, broken only by the splash of the oars and the sound of heavy breathing. Suddenly, A huge shadow appeared out of the fog ahead. The Empress of Oceania. Its hull, covered in rust and barnacles, loomed above them like the wall of a forgotten world. They found a rope ladder and, helping each other, climbed onto the deck. She was empty and dead. A damp wind blew across the overgrown decks, rocking the torn rigging. The ship was a gigantic sarcophagus. Dr. Ambrose leaned against the railing, gasping for breath. We did it. But Sir Algernon wasn't looking at the ship. He was looking into the fog they'd just emerged from. And there, in the white haze, he saw it. A huge, slow-moving dark shape. Old Kron's dorsal fin. It didn't attack. It didn't roar. It simply waited. The fin slowly turned and began to describe a wide arc around the Empress. He didn't stay at the island. He followed them. The pursuit wasn't over. It had only just begun. Jack, standing at the stern, looked at the water in horror. "Sir, look." The water around the ship began to boil, but not from the creature's movement. Debris began to surface from the depths, one after another. Recognizable debris. Lifeboat planks, scraps of sails, crates of provisions. And then, and this was the most horrific thing, bodies floated to the surface. The bodies of sailors. Passengers they had thought dead on the island. Their bodies were gnawed. But not simply mutilated, but carefully, almost ritualistically placed on the surface, forming a wide path leading to nowhere. Old Kron didn't just hunt. He cornered them. He toyed with them. And now he revealed that their escape was just part of his game. Sir Algernon turned and met Mrs. van der Linden's gaze. In her eyes he saw the same realization he had. They hadn't escaped. They had simply moved from one cage to a larger one. And their warden was now patrolling outside. They were alone. In the open ocean. On a dead ship. And an ancient, implacable horror waited patiently at their doorstep. Chapter 7. The Steel Embrace of Madness. The Empress of Oceania was no salvation. She was a steel coffin, slowly rusting in the ocean. The air inside was stale and musty, smelling of mold, machine oil, and something else. Sweet and putrid, like the breath of Kronos himself. The silence on the ship was different from that on the island. It was echoing, absolute, broken only by the creaking of stretched rigging and the mysterious rustling coming from the holds. There were only 6 of them. Sir Algernon, Mrs. van der Linden, Dr. Ambrose, young sailor Jack, and the Pendletons, a pair of elderly teachers whose quiet resolve proved stronger than steel. They barricaded themselves in the captain's saloon, the most secure place, with windows overlooking the deck and the ocean. The first day passed in days. They ate the meager provisions found in the galley and drank water from the system, which, fortunately, was still working. They tried not to look out the windows, but the magnetism of terror was stronger. There, in the blue-green abyss, the shadow was always present. Sometimes a huge, slowly drifting fin, sometimes just a vague, dark spot, huge as an underwater cliff. It never left them. On the second night, Mr. Pendleton disappeared. He went into the next cabin for a blanket and didn't return. When Mrs. Pendleton, distraught with grief, rushed to search for him, they found him at the entrance to the wardroom. He was lying on the floor, his eyes wide open, his face frozen in a mask of unspeakable terror. Not a single scratch. Dr. Ambrose, examining him, only shook his head. A broken heart. From fear, he saw something. From that moment on, the ship began to change, or rather their perception of it. At night, fragments of alien voices, hissing and grinding sounds drifted from the radio room. One morning they discovered that every clock on the ship, from pocket chronometers to enormous wall clocks, showed exactly 7 in the morning, the time of van der Linden's disappearance. The steel magnate whose fortune had built the ship seemed to have placed his eternal curse on it. Sir Algernon knew they were going mad. The monster wasn't just waiting. He was poisoning them like rats in a lab, testing their psyche. He decided to defeat them not with force but with despair. "We can't stay here," he told the others, his voice hoarse from lack of sleep. "He'll smoke us out of here, or we'll tear each other's throats out." "Where?" Mrs. Pendleton asked, her eyes fixed on her husband's body, her tears stinging and hard. "Back to the island? Into the ocean? We have no choice." "There is one," Mrs. van der Linden said, suddenly firm. Everyone looked at her. The former pampered socialite was gone, replaced by a woman with eyes of steel. "We must kill him. Definitely. Not with harpoons, not with bullets. We must lure him into a trap he can't escape from." Her plan was as insane as everything else in this nightmare. She recalled her husband's stories about the Empress's design. In the holds, next to the engine room, were tanks filled with liquid fuel, the flammable oil that fed the boilers. And then there was the main cargo hold, a vast void in the center of the ship. "We'll flood the compartment," she said, her eyes shining. "We'll create a pool for him. The bait will be the ship. He already considers it his prey. He'll circle around, trying to find an entrance. And we will give it to him." "So what? He'll just swim around there and then float away?" Jack asked skeptically. "No," Amelie van der Linden smiled, and there was nothing human in her smile. "Once he's inside, we'll light the fuel. We'll blow up this steel coffin with him in it. And us, if we have to." The idea of self-sacrifice hung in the air. But what was the alternative? Slow madness and death from fear? Working in the hold was hell. The darkness, broken only by the dim light of kerosene lamps, hummed with the whirring of the surviving machinery. Water seeped through the breach and splashed underfoot. Every sound made them flinch. Dr. Ambrose and Mrs. Pendleton remained in the cabin, too weak for such work. Sir Algernon, Jack, and Amelie worked like mad. They opened valves to let water pour into the cargo hold. They laid a makeshift hose from fuel tanks, creating a giant trap. The final step was to cut a hole in the hull, below the waterline, large enough for the monster to enter. As Jack, with a cry of rage, hacked through the last bulkhead, black, icy water gushed into the hull. They barely managed to jump away. They climbed up to the upper deck, to the lifeboats. It was their last elusive hope, to try to escape under cover of the explosion. and they began to wait. An hour passed. 2. The ocean was empty. Despair began to creep into their hearts again. Maybe he was gone? Maybe he realized their plan? And then the Empress shuddered. Not from the impact, but from within. A dull, powerful rumble reverberated through the entire hull, causing the deck to vibrate. He was here. He sensed an opening. He had penetrated his new lair. Sir Algernon looked at Amelie. She nodded, her face pale but determined. He turned the valve, opening the flow of fuel into the flooded compartment. "Run!" he shouted. They rushed to the boat. Jack and Sir Algernon began to lower it. At that moment, the beast's head appeared over the side, on the opposite side. His single eye looked at them with a cold, almost intelligent understanding. He wasn't trapped. He had allowed them to do this. He had gotten out. He knew. Kron moved toward them. His body slid across the steel deck with a clatter. He was between them and the lifeboat. Jack pulled out his knife with a mad cry. "I'll hold him off! Run!" It was a gesture of despair, nothing more. The jaws closed. Crunch. Silence. Sir Algernon and Amelie retreated to the stern. There was no escape route. And then he saw the emergency lever. The lever of the hand-fire pump, the same one that pumped water from the ocean. He pulled it towards himself. The siren blared, deafening them, but it wasn't just a sound, it was a signal, a call. Fury. The steel floor beneath the monster's feet suddenly heaved. Streams of icy seawater mixed with fuel gushed from the ventilation grates and ruptured pipes. It wasn't an explosion. It was chaos, just as they'd intended, but it had gotten out of control prematurely. Kron roared, choking on water and flammable liquid. He thrashed in panic, his powerful body slamming against the twisted structures. Sir Algernon grabbed Amelie's hand. Into the boat, now! They managed to climb into the only surviving lifeboat. They were rowing away, rowing with all their might, when the Empress of Oceania began its final journey. Clouds of steam and smoke billowed from its depths. Deafening thuds could be heard, either explosions or the death throes of the leviathan. They sailed on, never looking back, until a ball of fire lit up the night sky and the roar echoed in their ears and bones. When dawn broke, they were drifting in a silent ocean. There was no debris, no steel, no flesh, only an endless, indifferent surface. Amelie slept, exhausted, in the bottom of the boat. Algernon sat, staring into space. He felt no victory. He felt emptiness, gaping and bitter like a wound. He felt no victory. He felt emptiness. Dr. Ambrose and Mrs. Pendleton remained on the Empress of Oceania and died with the monster. But did they kill it? Or had it, sated by their fear, simply let them go, allowing them to carry the seed of this horror into the wider world? He didn't know. He knew only one thing, looking at his reflection in the calm water. The ocean was empty. But somewhere in its darkest depths, where no light penetrated, something ancient and immortal licked its wounds and waited. Waiting for new ships, new victims, new stories to whisper in the night. The two couldn't notice that someone was still watching them from the depths. Epilogue. The London Times, October 15th, 1889. The mystery of the Empress of Oceania. All passengers and crew reported missing. The British Admiralty today officially announced the end of search operations and declared all passengers and crew members of the transatlantic liner Empress of Oceania missing. The vessel, considered the pinnacle of shipbuilding, departed Southampton 2 months ago and disappeared without a trace somewhere in the Atlantic Ocean. The only source of information shedding any light on this mysterious story is the testimony of Mr. Thorsten, manager of the private resort Islands of Bliss. According to his statement, approximately 5 weeks ago, a drifting steamship, identified as the Empress of Oceania, was spotted near the archipelago. However, the vessel soon began sinking without any apparent cause. Mr. Thorsten had no means of salvaging the vessel, and no sign of its passengers or crew was found. Among the missing are dozens of prominent figures, including American steel magnate Jonathan van der Linden and his wife Amelie, British aristocrat Sir Algernon Fairchild, Russian Prince Peter Orlov, ship's captain Arthur McBride, chief engineer William Higgins, Pastor Abner Goodwin, and Dr. Sebastian Ambrose. The total number of missing exceeds 200. Mr. Thorsten also noted that unexplained hull damage was found on board the Empress, which he believed could not have been caused by a collision with an underwater rock or other known object, which was the cause of the ship's sinking. Admiralty experts, having studied the scant evidence, have put forward various theories, from a sudden epidemic that forced everyone to abandon ship to a pirate attack. However, none of these theories is sufficiently corroborated. The absence of any trace of the 200 people, bodies, or life rafts defies any logical explanation. The case of the disappearance of the Empress of Oceania has been closed and consigned to the archives as one of the most inexplicable maritime mysteries of our time. Official condolences have been sent to the families of the missing. In maritime circles, whispers continue to circulate about the ghost ship and the mystery buried forever in the ocean's bottomless depths.